Hey, Jeff, this is Jay. Looks like we're a couple minutes after 9. Looks like we got a fair number of the coordinating council on here, but I'll wait for the thumbs up from you to get the meeting going.
We are thinking the same thing. I think we are good to go. So as folks join in, please, if you haven't, I think we'll keep an eye on unmuting folks so that you can all self-mute. And with that, I want to just kind of say thank you, everybody, for making the time to be here. Our meeting today is focused on presentation and discussion of several items in preparation for this fall's October meeting, where things will likely come back to you for action. And with that, I will turn it over to Jay.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff, and welcome everybody for this kind of check-in meeting of the ACCSP Coordinating Council. As Jeff just mentioned, we've got a couple things on the agenda today, but you can kind of think about today as a good prep meeting for the annual meeting in October. The sort of the marquee item here is the SCIFish discussion. So just be aware that it's just a discussion today. So you're going to get a presentation. You're issued the policy documents, but this is just a chance for you to kind of hear directly from the SCIFish team and start to think about the policies, think about this application, and today is about asking questions, and if you're ready to give some feedback, that's great, but also understand that we're going to come back in October as well. So just a really good opportunity to be nice and prepped up for getting the SCIFish application over the goal line here. So why don't we get started with, we have an agenda. Are there any additions, modifications to the agenda as it was published? If you do have any modifications, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So why don't we move on then to the approval of the minutes from the May meeting? Are there any edits, additions, deletions from the May meeting minutes from anyone? If so, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any hands, so we will consider the minutes approved. Actually, I think I need to do a motion. I think I need to do a motion on both of these. So not seeing any hands on the agenda. Are there any objections to approving the agenda as submitted? Please raise your hand if you object to that. Okay, not seeing any hands for the agenda, and same with the minutes. I did not see any hands for changing the minutes. So are there any objections from the coordinating council to approving the minutes as submitted? Please raise your hand if so. Not seeing any hands, so we will consider the minutes approved by consensus as well. All right, I think I got that. I feel a little rusty. I didn't have any boards during the last meeting week, so shaking the rust off here.
You're doing great.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so next up on the agenda is a moment for some public comment. So if there are any members of the public that are on the webinar that would like to make any comments that are not on our agenda today, so that's the nuance here. We've got a number of items on the agenda. That's not what this is for, but if you have anything new that you'd like to bring before the coordinating council, please raise your hand. Okay, giving folks time to find their hand here, their virtual hand. And I'm not seeing any, so we will consider that there are no public comments that need to be made prior to us launching into the main agenda here. So with that, the next agenda item is to review and discuss the SCIFish policies for ACCSP's citizen science mobile application. I am going to turn it over to Julia Bird to kick us off here, but I think they will be swapping presenters in as they go along. So Julia, whenever you are ready, please feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you, Jay. And one moment while I switch presenters, and we're going to change screens here. Julia, you now have the ball.
And Jeff, while Julia pulls up our presentation, I'm doing the introduction, so I'm just going to jump right in.
Julie, go right ahead. Thank you. And I see the SCIFish screen now, so you guys are all set.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to do a brief background before Julia jumps into her presentation and talk a little bit about the SCIFish, how the SCIFish project became part of the ACCSP RFP. As Julia goes through her project, you'll see that the South Atlantic Council built an application called Release, and then North Carolina also built a project, and theirs is called Catch You Later. And I think with great wisdom, those two partners realized that they were very similar applications, and that this was an opportunity to prevent stovepipes and to help out all partners. And so they were able to bring this to the ACCSP RFP. And this is a project that's been funded for 3 years ongoing, where a number of workshops were held and other things that Julia will go over. But over the 3 years of this project, the ACCSP has funded this so that we can get to where we are today and have something that's available to all the partners. So before we get started, I just wanted to put out a kudos to those two partners for having the foresight to see the to avoid the stovepipes early on in the process. So I'll turn it over to Julia now to get into the presentation.
All right, thanks, Julie. Just a quick check that y'all can hear me.
We've got you, Julia.
Okay, good deal. So good morning, everyone. For those folks who I haven't had an opportunity to meet, I'm Julia Bird, and I am the Citizen Science Program Manager for the South Atlantic Council, and really excited and appreciate the opportunity to share information on kind of the SCIFish platform and the policies and procedures that we've been developing, and looking forward to getting feedback from you guys. Before getting into the presentation itself, I first wanted to give a quick shout out and a thank you to all of the folks who've served on our SCIFish organizing committee. They're kind of listed on the screen here, and as Julie mentioned, this was a kind of a partner project with the North Carolina DMF and the South Atlantic Council, but we've been really lucky to have representatives from many of the other ACCSP partners contributing to the development of the SCIFish platform and to the policies that we'll be going over today. Many of these folks have been working on this for over 3 years, and so they played a really valuable role in the development of this platform, and I think it's been a real benefit to have so many partners contributing to this project. And so I think what we're going to end up with is a really useful, valuable tool that all of the ACCSP partners will be able to use. And so before getting into the policies themselves, I just wanted to give kind of a little background. Julie did a great job kind of introducing kind of the initiation of SCIFish, but I wanted to provide a little bit of background on the project and what we're actually trying to do and the reason for its development before getting into the policies themselves. So as many of you guys know, citizen science can be a really powerful tool and can help us better understand marine fish populations. And in the past few years, it seems like there's this growing interest in seeing if citizen science can be used to kind of supplement marine fisheries data collection, particularly in the recreational sector. And so with that in mind, that kind of led the South Atlantic Council, North Carolina, and ACCSP to kind of partner to develop SCIFish, which is kind of this new citizen science mobile application and project builder that's going to support the capture and sharing of information of fish along the Atlantic coast. So kind of efforts to develop SCIFish really got underway in kind of mid-2020. And the long-term goal of SCIFish is we really want to develop kind of a citizen science mobile application and a menu-driven project builder that kind of partners along the Atlantic can use to easily create a customizable application kind of on the fly by selecting from specific pre-identified data fields kind of without the need to develop kind of standalone applications for each new project or data need. So trying to not stovepipe things, as kind of Julie alluded to earlier. And so the idea is that SCIFish would kind of act as this kind of umbrella app that could house multiple projects. And a lot of times when we kind of describe SCIFish to folks is you can think of kind of, we use a game console kind of analogy. So you can think of SCIFish as the Atari or the PlayStation, and then the individual projects are like the individual games, your Donkey Kongs, your Froggers, your Pitfalls, that sort of thing. And so some of the main reasons we were really interested in developing SCIFish is we really thought having this kind of umbrella app would help kind of reduce the cost needed to develop individual applications, and it could also reduce the time needed to kind of build an application from the ground up. And also one of the most important things we wanted to do is try to increase the consistency in the data fields and structure. So if there were multiple projects that were collecting the same type of data, it would be done in a standardized way. And that in particular seems to be kind of increasingly important as the number of fisheries apps kind of are growing, and there's this growing interest in using citizen science for marine fisheries. And as Julie mentioned, this started as a partner project, and we've been really lucky to have 3 years of funding. And so we've kind of broken the development of this project into 3 phases. In the first phase, as Julie mentioned earlier, the South Atlantic Council had this app called Release. North Carolina had this app called Catch You Later. So phase 1 was really trying to kind of combine those apps under the SCIFish umbrella. In addition to doing that in phase 1, we also held a series of SCIFish scoping meetings back in the spring of 2021 with folks from our Atlantic kind of fisheries community. We had over 23 organizations across 15 states that provided feedback to us during these scoping meetings. And at these meetings, really what we tried to do is better understand how SCIFish could fit the needs of our fisheries community. And so we're able to get a ton of input across most partners through that kind of scoping meeting process. And so phase 1 was complete in around kind of mid-2021. We started on phase 2. Phase 2 was where we actually kind of launched SCIFish with the Release and Catch You Later projects. We expanded the species we were collecting information in Release, and then we started to kind of develop this kind of project builder prototype and began laying the groundwork for policy development. One of the things that we heard as we went through our scoping meetings back in 2021 is the need to develop kind of policies and procedures for developing projects within SCIFish. So folks couldn't come in and kind of build a project kind of willy-nilly, but there was kind of a process in place to try to give projects their best chance of success. And so phase 2 ended, we wrapped that up in kind of mid-2022. And so now we're working on phase 3. And phase 3 was really about kind of developing the SCIFish policies and procedures and then finishing that project builder prototype. We're bringing kind of 2 new projects in to help test the project builder, another one with North Carolina and their tagging program, and then also a group from the University of New England who's collecting information on striped bass. And so today, what we're really concentrating on is sharing information with you guys on the policies and procedures we've developed for SCIFish and getting kind of some initial feedback from you guys on what we've done. So moving into the policies, first kind of big picture, the vision for SCIFish, again, is to create kind of this citizen science mobile application that encourages and supports the capture and sharing of data on Atlantic coast fisheries. kind of the overall mission of SCIFish is we really want to try to standardize the collection of citizen science data along the Atlantic coast fisheries. We want to provide a single platform for multiple data collection projects. We want to provide this flexible project builder, so you're able to create new data collection projects within the platform for minimal resources. And then we want to make sure we're providing access to data that support fisheries management and assessment. And so the overall administration of SCIFish will be through ACCSP. So they, once this kind of partner project wraps up, SCIFish will be handed off to them, and they will be kind of responsible for kind of managing and maintaining the application and project builder. And also all of the data from SCIFish goes into ACCSP's data warehouse. As far as kind of oversight for this new SCIFish platform, we're recommending that kind of a new group be formed, a new committee within ACCSP, and we are calling them the SCIFish Advisory Panel, or SAP. And so this new group would be responsible for drafting and recommending any SCIFish policy updates. They would oversee and implement the SCIFish application process, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then they'll also coordinate and review kind of SCIFish project updates. As far as membership of the SAP group, we're recommending that it be comprised of individuals that have citizen science experience, and are recommending that it includes one representative from each of the following categories. So from each region, a federal, state agency and council representative, representatives from kind of the coordinating council, the operations and advisors committee, and then also has an ACCSP staff member. And so when we were talking through this, we think that kind of one individual may represent more than one category. So you could have someone from the Southeast who's also a state agency rep. So one person could cover more than one of these kind of categories. And then I think another thing that's important to point out is, as far as kind of the ACCSP staff members' involvement, we feel like it would be best for this person to be kind of a full participant, a full-fledged panel member, not just a liaison, as they are with some of the other technical committees. And the reason for this is, although there's kind of no money being provided through kind of SCIFish, so it's very different than the kind of RFP ACCSP process, but SCIFish is a tool that will use ACCSP resources. So we feel like a staff member should be a full participant and contribute to recommending projects for approval to be built within the SCIFish platform. And so overall, kind of our approach to project development within SCIFish is we really want to support projects that collect data for marine or diadromous fish along the Atlantic coast. We want to make sure that projects are filling data gaps or data deficiencies and addressing kind of identified research needs. We want to make sure there's intentional design, so it is clearly articulated how data collected through a project could be used to inform management or assessment. And we really want to kind of encourage collaboration between fishermen and scientists in the development and implementation of projects. As far as kind of who can develop projects in SCIFish, we're recommending that projects must have an ACCSP partner as a principal investigator or PI, or they must be sponsored by an ACCSP partner. And so partner sponsors would provide a letter of support and outline a plan to monitor the progress of a particular project. And the reason we kind of felt it was important to kind of have an opportunity for kind of sponsorship, because it provides a way for partners to kind of support or endorse a SCIFish project that's going to kind of further fisheries management, but they may not have the capacity to kind of undertake right now. And so to develop a project within SCIFish, we've developed kind of a two-step application process. Before getting into that, I do want to note that kind of PIs will be responsible for acquiring funding for projects. So if you go through this application project and your project is approved to be built in SCIFish, it doesn't include any monetary support. That's something that the PI must acquire on their own. It's going through this application process to start using kind of the SCIFish platform and tool. And so the application process, the first step is that PIs would submit kind of a pre-application, and the pre-application would be reviewed by kind of that new group called the SAP, or the SCIFish Advisory Panel. And then if review criteria were met for the pre-application, PIs would be invited to submit a full proposal. Then the full proposals are reviewed by the SAP. And if the review criteria are met, then the PIs would be given access to SCIFish, and they would initially kind of build their project within the evaluation version of SCIFish, and then it would move into production. And so we have kind of pre-applications laid out to be accepted 4 times a year in April, June, October, and December. And then full applications would be accepted twice per year in February and August. And we tried to lay out the timing of this so full applications would be complete before kind of RFPs come available in the spring and the fall. Both the pre-application and full application applications themselves are built in SurveyMonkey, so submissions for this would all be kind of online. And next, we wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the pre-application and full application. And so we'll start here with the pre-application. And so the pre-application asks PIs to provide information on kind of the topics laid out on the screen here. So who are your project collaborators? What are the goals of the project? What specific data gaps or research questions are you trying to address? We want kind of a brief overview of the methodology that will be used, including why the PI feels this project is appropriate for a citizen science approach. We want to know what data fields they're planning to collect, what they think the anticipated outcome of the project is, and then a little bit of information on timeline and budget. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, we're not giving away any kind of funding through this application process, but we just want some kind of general information on budget. How much do you think the project is going to cost? Do you have funding for it? If you don't have funding for it, where are you looking to get funding for it? And so to help PIs develop kind of pre-applications and their full applications, I wanted to note that we have put together in the policies an appendix that have citizen science project development resources. And so an example of one of these resources is on the screen here. And as many of you guys know, citizen science is just kind of one tool in the fisheries kind of management toolbox that can help with data collection and building and strengthening relationships and trust and things like that. But citizen science isn't necessarily a good fit for all projects. And so what we've tried to do is provide some resources that will help determine if citizen science is a good fit for your project. So for example, as we've been kind of talking through this with our organizing committee, some of the things we've been thinking about are things like the importance of engagement for citizen science projects that need to have a simple protocol and kind of strong motivation for your participants to want to collect kind of information are some examples of what may make a good citizen science project. So these appendix, the appendix has kind of this table, lots of other resources to help you figure out if citizen science is the right approach, and if so, how you can build the project to give it its best chance of success. And so once the PI submits kind of their pre-application, then the SAP, this kind of SCIFish Advisory Panel, will kind of review that pre-application. And the review criteria for the pre-application is really, first, did they kind of include all the sections within the pre-application? Was it complete? And then the two things that we're really looking for other than completeness are, you know, does the project address how the data could be applied to assessment and management? And they need to explain why this project is a good fit for citizen science. So pre-applications that meet that criteria are invited to submit a full application. If a pre-application doesn't meet the criteria, they'll receive feedback from the SAP and then be encouraged to apply at the next kind of pre-application deadline. And so moving on to the full application, there are a number of topics that we're asked for information on the pre-application that we're asking for more information on in the full application. And the reason for these kind of repeated topics is because in the full application, we're asking for a fair amount of more detail. And so in the full application, we have those kind of repeated topics, and then we're also asking the PIs to address some new topics as well. And those include things like data use. Have you kind of spoken with either kind of the managers or scientists that you're hoping to use the data collected through your project? Are you consulting with them? Do you have a data management plan? Although the kind of data from SCIFish projects will go into the data warehouse, individual project managers are responsible for the QA/QC of their own projects. We want to know about kind of the volunteer training plan that they're planning to have in place, their communication plan specifically for kind of recruitment and retention of their volunteers. We want to know kind of what metrics or criteria they're planning to use to evaluate their project. And then also we want to know if there are any risks associated with the projects and how those risks can be mitigated. And so again, once this full application is submitted online, the kind of SCIFish advisory panel kind of will review those full applications. And then some of the kind of key criteria that they'll be reviewing the application for are kind of listed out on the screen. You know, does the project address a data gap? Is the anticipated use or outcome of the project of value to the partners and to the industry? What is kind of the technical merit of the project? Is it a good fit for citizen science? Did you have a clear data management plan? Do you have a clear volunteer kind of training plan? What's your plan for participant engagement and kind of evaluation metrics? So for each of these review criteria, a SAP member will be ranking a project between 1 and 5, with 1 being, I don't recommend this project for development in SCIFish at this time, to 5 being excellent. We want this project to be built in SCIFish. So scores for each of the criteria kind of will be averaged across SAP members, and then projects that receive an average score less than 3 in any of the criteria will not be approved for development within SCIFish at this point. The SAP members will provide kind of feedback on the application in that case and encourage kind of the PI to resubmit their full application kind of at the next deadline. And so once someone goes through kind of the application process, the next step is they'll be able to use the project builder to kind of build their project under the SCIFish umbrella. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the SCIFish project builder. Fran Karp with Harbor Light put together a really awesome video that kind of walks through how to build a project within the project builder. If you haven't had a chance to review that yet, I would encourage you to do so. It's really cool and really incredible to kind of see this idea that started in kind of our heads 3 years ago come to fruition. And it's amazing to see how you can use the project builder to build a project within the SCIFish app, you know, within 10 or 15 minutes. We'll be, I think, Jeff and crew will be sharing this presentation afterwards. There's a link on this slide that'll take you to that video if you haven't had a chance to see it yet. And so what I wanted to do is just walk through a few features of the project builder that I wanted to make sure to point out to you guys. And so when I'm doing this, kind of on the screen, on the left-hand side of the screen is the actual kind of project builder. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is kind of what it looks like in the SCIFish app. So right now you see pulled up on the app kind of our release project. So when you get into the project builder, the example that Fran does in the video is she's building a new project called It's a Fluke. When you go into the project builder, there are kind of 5 sections that you will kind of customize for your project. First is the home page, where you'll choose kind of the command buttons and what you want to appear on the home page when someone opens your project. The records helps you define the data fields that you'll be collecting. The about section allows you to customize kind of information about your project that you might want to share with your kind of participants. The navigation menu helps you configure kind of if you want to include any social media links or links to your website within kind of the project. And then the branding piece lets you kind of customize the colors of your project so it will look different than the other projects within the SCIFish app. And so the first thing I wanted to point out is just kind of, I'm going to zoom into a screenshot from Fran building in the records field. And one of the things that we really wanted to make sure that we're doing as we build SCIFish and incorporate new data fields into SCIFish is to make sure when ACCSP standards exist that we're using them. And so this is an example of Fran was adding species to the It's a Fluke project in the video she put together. And as you pull this up, you can see that the ACCSP's kind of IDIS species list pulls up. And so you're automatically using kind of ACCSP standards for species. You can pick which species you want to include in your project, but you're pulling from that standardized list. And so again, this was one of the most important things. We wanted to make sure that if ACCSP standards exist for a data field, that's what we're using in this project builder. The next thing I just wanted to chat a little bit about, because I know there have been a number of partners who've reached out to us about SCIFish, and one of the things folks are really interested in making sure that their project may have a different look or feel from other projects. So Harbor Light built in this kind of branding piece where you can change the coloration so your project can have kind of a different skin and look different than other projects. So in the example that Fran built for the It's a Fluke project, she gave it kind of a Barbie colored theme just to make it kind of stand out from the blue and greens you see on release. And so that's a really cool feature that I think folks will be able to take advantage of to kind of brand their project specifically for their audience. After you kind of build your project, it's really easy to publish it from the kind of online project builder into your mobile phone. So what you do, you press this publish button, a new box will pop up, and there are different channels that you can publish to, which allows you different options to kind of beta test the project before it goes live. What you do is you record this numeric value here, and then in the app itself, you go to the hamburger menu and choose the preview project. You enter that numeric code you got from the project builder, click OK, and then your project shows up in the app itself. And so you can see the Barbie themed It's a Fluke project automatically show up. It's a really incredible process. It's smooth, and we're still beta testing, and you can build a new project within 10 to 15 minutes if you know what data fields you want to collect. So kudos to kind of Fran for putting together that video, and for the Harbor Light folks for kind of working on this. And if you haven't checked out the video, I'd encourage you to do so. And then there's just a couple other things that I wanted to share about building a project in SCIFish. So when SCIFish first will become available to partners after kind of this project wraps up, it's going to be restricted to the current data fields in the project builder, which are kind of summarized on this screen here. Again, we're trying to use ACCSP standards whenever they're available. And so the fields we chose to include in this kind of initial round of the project builder were informed by those scoping meetings we held back in 2021. So there were kind of 23 organizations across 15 states that helped us figure out which data fields were most important to include to help fill data gaps that folks thought could be, that would work well with a citizen science approach. So right now, folks will be limited to these data fields. However, in the future, eventually folks will be able to request that new data fields get added to SCIFish. And the process that we're kind of recommending to do this would look similar to ACCSP standard codes process. The last thing kind of I wanted to point out about kind of building a project within SCIFish is the account creation. And this is a little bit of a work in progress. Right now, what's available is kind of option one. This is what's currently in place, and PIs have to create SCIFish project accounts for users. And so they're actually building accounts within SCIFish. So once that kind of PI sets up a SCIFish account for that user, they'll get access to SCIFish. If you have folks who already have SCIFish accounts, then they'll be able to use that same login to get into SCIFish. Kind of option 2 that's been discussed is where users create their own SCIFish project accounts. So it's kind of like auto approval. Someone could just go in, a volunteer could just go in and create their account. This would mean that SCIFish access would come through a non-SCIFish account. And so as our organizing committee has kind of been talking, it seems like partners may need a mix of kind of option 1 and option 2. And so we've talked some about kind of this option 3, which combines kind of option 1 and option 2, where a PI would choose at the beginning of their project whether they wanted to kind of create accounts within SCIFish or use kind of non-SCIFish accounts. To get to option 3, it would require more ACCSP resources. And so this is something, again, that's still a work in progress and under discussion. One thing I do want to point out is that North Carolina, which has been kind of a partner on this project from the beginning, wants to expand their Catch You Later project, and then their tagging program is kind of helping us beta test the project builder right now. And once they launch, they'll want to expand their project, and they really need something like option 2 in order to do that. So I think different partners may have different needs. And so we will probably need to continue this discussion to figure out where kind of we're moving with account creation. And then the only thing I wanted to note on kind of policy topics, if you guys have had an opportunity to check out the document we put together, there are a number of additional policy topics included in there that we didn't touch on in the presentation today, things like hardware requirements, privacy and confidentiality, transparency, data access. And so we weren't planning to get into detail in the presentation today on these topics, but we're happy to answer any questions y'all might have on those as well. And I think Jay and Jeff already kind of mentioned this, but we wanted to talk a little bit about next steps for SCIFish policy. So here we are in August, and we're kind of sharing this information with you guys for the first time. And so we're looking for some kind of initial review and feedback. We'll incorporate kind of feedback we get from you guys. And then in September, we'll be sharing this information with ACCSP operations and advisory committees. And then the SCIFish policy will be coming back to you guys in October for you to consider for kind of action. And so that's kind of the next steps as far as kind of the SCIFish policy goes. And then the last thing we wanted to do before getting into the discussion was just highlight some of the kind of key takeaways that we thought were kind of important to keep in mind as we get into this discussion on SCIFish. And so from the policy that we've developed, just a kind of reminder that in order to build a project within SCIFish, you must be kind of a partner or be sponsored by a partner. We initially want to focus on supporting citizen science projects in SCIFish. Through conversations of our kind of organizing committee, there have been some discussions about how SCIFish could support other types of projects. So there may be room for kind of growth of SCIFish in the future. But right now, initially, we want to focus on supporting citizen science projects. Again, want to make sure to note that projects are initially going to be limited to the current data fields within the project builder. Want to make sure to note that although project development doesn't require funding, it will use ACCSP resources. In order to provide oversight of kind of this new tool, we're suggesting and recommending the creation of this new kind of SCIFish advisory panel. And also think it's important to note that right now account creation is currently done through SCIFish, but through some conversations we've had with our organizing committee, it seems like that's gonna maybe need to evolve moving forward. And so that's kind of the SCIFish policy information we were hoping to chat with you guys about today. I know we have some specific questions we were hoping to get feedback from you guys on, and we're happy to kind of answer any questions or hear any other kind of feedback you have. Jay or Jeff, I don't know if you want to kind of stop here and get general questions, or if you want me to go through some of the specific feedback we're requesting before kind of opening it up. However you want to handle is good with me.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Julia. That was awesome. And can I just take a moment? I definitely appreciated the video game analogy and the deep track with Pitfall. That was great. Nice job.
I'm showing age a little bit.
Why don't we take just a minute to see if there's any, clarifying questions that people have, just to make sure before we keep marching along here. So if anybody has a question on what you've seen so far, please go ahead and raise your hand and I'll give you a shout out. Richard Cody, go ahead.
Thanks, Jay. Can everybody hear me?
We got you, Richard.
All right. Yeah, Julia, thank you for the presentation. It's very good. I had a couple of questions, and the first one relates to the question of how data can be incorporated. And I just wondered, when you I guess it would be referring to how it would address a specific data gap. I would imagine that after time, there will be a buildup of different projects under the portfolio, and that there will be a need to manage what's already on the list, we'll say, versus a new project that comes on board that maybe just refines or comes up with a slightly better method than one that maybe might be in existence. Have you guys put any thought into how you would manage this, an expanding list of projects that cover, an array of different data needs over time?
And oops, sorry.
No, that's okay. So maybe just some ground rules here. So Julia, or whoever the question gets addressed to, please just go ahead and jump in. And then Kathy or Julie, if you also want to respond, please do so. So Julia, sounded like you were ready to go, so go ahead.
Okay, yeah, and I was going to say the same thing. Kathy and Julie, please speak up. And so I guess we haven't talked in detail within kind of the organizing committee after we have all of these kind of a number of projects, and there may be new projects coming in that are similar to kind of other projects and how we would handle that. I mean, I think we want to make sure if projects from different partners are trying to do the same things, they're collecting the some of the same data fields, so there is kind of consistency within a project. I think one of the benefits of having this application process is if we see a project come in that is very similar to another project that's already in place, we can perhaps get those two PIs together to figure out, do they need to develop a new project, or can it kind of be folded in with the other project? And so, I mean, I think we've developed this process to make sure we know what projects are coming in, and so we can help connect PIs from projects that are already underway with new projects that are coming in to make sure we're not being duplicative. But I think we haven't kind of talked about that in large detail. Kathy or Julie, do y'all have stuff to add to that?
Yeah, this is Julie. I would just add that I think you sort of mentioned the idea of, if we did have two projects that were addressing the same gap, that wouldn't necessarily be horrible if they had different audiences, but that's where we would leverage the whole point of SCIFish, which is that it is something that behind the scenes has the ACCSP data management in the warehouse. And so, like Julia said, it would meet those standards. And so even if there are two projects filling the data gap from different angles because they have different audiences, the SAP can evaluate that as the second project comes on, but the data would still be available to be collectively used in science and management. because it's standardized and it could essentially be used as a single data set.
And this is Kathy. Real quick, we're planning to have a contact list on the ACCSP website that's an inventory of the projects that could easily be reviewed by anybody for transparency, of course, through ACCSP, but would directly go to a summary page with the partners so that other people submitting projects can see what is currently being done, what is archived, and they can have that level of awareness as they develop their project as well.
Great, thanks
Thank
for
you.
that. Thanks, good. Sounds like Richard's good there. Great. Okay, I've got a couple other hands. David Gleckner, sorry if I didn't get your last name right, but feel free to unmute and ask your question.
That was actually perfect. It's usually butchered. I appreciate it. So my question is, do we plan on having the ability for PIs to develop their own phone app that could pass data into SCIFish? Assuming we would kind of treat it the same way as trip tickets going in through multiple vendor applications into SCIFish. So something along those lines.
Hey Dave, this is Julie. I'm just going to jump in here. Yes, we addressed our presentation on the idea that you would be using the project builder in our application, but behind the application is an API that the application uses. And so the SCIFish API, it would be available to a third-party development. So if you did want to pay for your own app development and use the SCIFish API, you can. However, you do still have to go through the process of the application solely because we want to ensure that the project still meets all of the rigorous criteria of being a good citizen science project and a fit for SCIFish. So we don't want the, we'll call it, maybe, I don't know if quality is the right word, but we don't want the quality of the data that are diluted in that set of tables to be diluted by another project. So you can go through the process and not build your app in Project Builder, but just take advantage of the API.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you both. Next up, I have Carrie Kennedy. Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a couple questions that actually follow on pretty nicely to that one. And that's one, what kind of changes in server size or cloud, what technical, like storage, what kind of changes in data storage does ACCSP anticipate might be needed for this, and how would we pay for that?
At this point, we don't anticipate any new technical needs.
Okay.
We can accommodate this with the systems that we have existing.
Excellent. And then part two of my question was, what about, and it's similar to the last question, what about projects that have previously been done in states, like say a state has a volunteer angler survey and wanted to make those data available, you know, all the data fields were the same as ACCSP standards and wanted to make those data available to other, you know, publicly available so that they could be queried for stock assessments or, you know, graduate students or whatever. Is there any anticipation of doing any sort of data feed of historical citizen science projects that meet the same criteria into the data warehouse?
So I would say that if you want to in future feed those data, like if it's still going on and you want to in future feed those data in, there would be no objection to the historical data being loaded. I did want to note, however, that you mentioned something about publicly available, and we did note, I think as a side note, confidentiality. So just as a point of clarification for the whole group, each project is considered confidential. And so that project PI can see it. And that's one of the reasons, as Kathy mentioned, to have project PI contact information available, because if you want to see the data, you do have to ask that PI, because we are by default assuming that these data are confidential and not publicly available. So these data are not going to be publicly available on the data warehouse. They'll be available in the login warehouse.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Great, thanks, Carrie. I don't see any other hands at this point. And so I think I'm going back to you, Julia, to kind of hit on the specific feedback that you're looking for here. So go ahead.
All right, great. So one of the things we wanted to kind of request feedback from you on is the creation and the membership of this new group, the SCIFish Advisory Panel, or SAP. And so kind of what we're kind of recommending and wanting to kind of get feedback from you guys on kind of this recommendation is we're hoping to kind of keep the committee size to the SAP between kind of 8 and 12 members. That's kind of what our SCIFish organizing committee is right now. This is a group that's going to need to be meeting multiple times a year to kind of be reviewing applications. And so we think kind of that size will be a manageable size where the group can get a lot of feedback from a variety of partners, but also is manageable and small enough to get kind of work done. The plan would be to kind of announce the SAP membership application through ACCSP's committee newsletter. And then if folks were interested in serving on the SAP, they would kind of fill out their kind of applications, and the applications would be forwarded to kind of ACCSP's deputy director through that partner's operations committee member. So kind of similar to what is done now, that kind of the operations committee members kind of help populate the kind of technical committees through their organizations. The additional step here is just that there would be a specific kind of application for the SAP. And then we're recommending that the ACCSP Coordinating Council Leadership Team is actually the group that makes appointments to the SAP. And kind of the membership term would be similar to kind of other ACCSP committees. Members would be kind of able to stay within the group until they resign or till they're replaced by the ACCSP Coordinating Council Leadership Team. And so we are kind of looking to get feedback from you guys on kind of this recommendation if you're comfortable with it, or if you have some other suggestions.
Okay, let's see. So let's take a moment here to get some feedback. If anybody has, just a reminder, this isn't your only shot at this. So, you know, I think it'd be helpful if you have some initial thoughts so that the team can kind of think about it between now and October. But again, we will be reviewing again in October. So right as we transitioned, I saw Erica Burgess's hand go up. So Erica, whenever you're ready, feel free to unmute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My hand was raised actually in response to the last question and the response that was given to that regarding confidentiality of data and access. So I don't know if it's okay that we go back and revisit that for a second.
I think that's totally fine, Erica. So feel free to ask your question.
Okay. I was wondering if the group had been working on this, had considered a state's ability or inability to participate in SCIFish based on that decision about confidentiality. I think I would need, in Florida, my legal counsel to review it because it might be a limiting factor given that we don't have the same confidentiality rules for recreational data that we do for commercial trip ticket data. So I would love to know whether this has been discussed and if it's something that needs to be discussed further if it hasn't yet. Thank you.
Hey, Erica, this is Julie. The approach to confidentiality is if someone wants access to the data, then they would need the approval of the PI. So I would say that if you don't deem your data to be confidential, you could just say that anybody who requests access can have it. I don't know if that would meet your lawyer's rules, but we can definitely revisit that if needed.
Thank you, Julie. That is helpful to know. And it seems like that would work, but I guess before we started a project, we'd have to go through that review.
Yes.
Great, thanks, Erica. Let's see, you got a couple hands. Richard, Cody, I saw yours first, so go ahead.
Right. Has to do really with the membership of the advisory panel. I wonder, I mean, there are some new and emerging methods that are becoming available now for better use of what we call non-probability methods. So, you know, citizen science types of data collection would fall under that category. Is there any consideration of perhaps you know, maybe some statistical expertise on the panel that would, you know, maybe inform, say, a decision to use or not use data in a way that you know, we don't what's the word for it, that we don't say forget about maybe some criteria that are needed. I worry that you know, we would have a very well designed data collection application, and it does a wonderful job, but you know, whether or not it can be feasibly integrated to address data gaps for what are largely probability based survey data, how you do that is important, and it could impact, if we don't consider it early on, you know, the use of the data ultimately. And I think that, you know, one of the big challenges for any kind of a citizen science application is basically making sure that the data gets used, or else you just lose that recruitment and interest that you know, that was well intended at the beginning. So I just wonder if I would make the recommendation anyway that there's some statistical expertise that kind of addresses the interface between the citizen science component and the actual data gap that it's trying to address, either through the application process, pre-app or whatever, but at some point early on, rather than have it hit us at the end and then we're faced with it, coming up with a way to you know, use the data. Sorry, that's a long-winded way, and it's not really a question, but just a recommendation basically for maybe some more statistical expertise on the panel.
Yeah, and Richard, thanks for that recommendation. And we'll point out maybe a couple of things that I didn't get into any detail, but in the application process, in the full application, we ask specific questions about data use and whether or not you have reached out to someone who you may want to use the data, stock assessment scientist, fishery manager who you're hoping will use your data, and whether they have kind of reviewed kind of the methodology and the data field you're collecting to make sure that data meet that intended use. And so I think we're trying to get at some of what your kind of recommendation was kind of through the application process. And so we're trying to really encourage anyone who is developing a citizen science project to loop those kind of folks who you want to use the data into the project at the beginning to help you design it in a way where the data can meet their intended use. That doesn't mean, I guess we haven't talked in detail about having folks with specific statistical expertise on kind of this SAP. I mean, I think that is certainly something that could happen, but I just wanted to note that we're trying to get a little bit at your recommendation through the application process, making sure to encourage people strongly to be talking to the people who they want to use their data once they have the project idea.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Perfect.
Yeah, just if I can be so bold here, I think it's a super important question and can lead to, you know, I don't know what the right term is, but expectations that aren't met. And so Julia, that response is a really good one. And maybe one of the things you can do is to add, you know, in the review process, add that as a criteria. You know, do they have somebody from the assessment working group on here or something to that effect? So I think, you know, handling in the application process makes a lot of sense, and maybe it's in the review part of it that you can add a criteria that specifically looks at that. So good discussion. Let's see, Brandon Muffley. Go ahead, Brandon.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks for this presentation. This was really awesome to see, and this was a great document to go through. I guess my question and or comment, I guess I'm not quite 100% sure, but on the second bullet in regards to announce SAP membership through an application. So my sense is that we're going to have people go through some formal application process and fill out some sort of questionnaire, I guess. So, you know, so A, I guess that was the question, is that the thinking? And then B, since it's primarily, it seems like membership would be comprised of partners, of ACCSP partners, I was thinking maybe it could just be handled through partners nominating folks to serve on the committee itself versus requiring people go through an application. But maybe, depending on how you handle Richard's previous question, maybe having people apply and identify some of their expertise and how they fill and can evaluate citizen science applications. Maybe that's where you could get some of that information. So I guess I'm debating both sides of this process here, if people actually need to apply or if we could simplify things and just have have ACCSP partners just nominate people to be on the committee.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and it's something we've talked a little bit about. We don't want to make kind of the application process onerous in any way, but we thought, since we may be looking for specific citizen science types of expertise for this group and would be wanting to kind of maybe balance out expertise so we have kind of a well-rounded group. That's why we were, I think, leaning towards doing an application online. We haven't developed anything yet, but it was basically to get a sense of kind of what the expertise of the different individuals that are interested in membership, but certainly don't want to make the process more complicated than it has to be. But I think having some sense of kind of the expertise or the kind of experience that folks can bring to the table could be useful. So that doesn't really answer your question. I guess the short answer to your question is we haven't talked about this in detail, but we're thinking it could be helpful, even if it's not an official kind of application form, but have people, if they're nominated, have 3 or 4 sentences describing their experience in order for the coordinating council leadership team to kind of make appointments.
You know, I think that's really helpful. Just thinking things through, and yeah, I think getting that information would be helpful. Again, even thinking about Richard's previous comments. So thanks for that.
Great, thanks. You know,
Jay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jay, Kathy, if you don't mind, again, going back to Richard's comment and follow up to Julia's, one of the specific criteria for the full application is the partner specifying how the data will be used in assessment and or for the management process. So going back to that slide in terms of whether they're invited to get through all the steps in the full applications and go ahead and get permission to design the project, to build the project in the project builder, we had indicated that all of the SAP scores for each criteria would be average, such that if a project did not have at minimum a 3 out of 5, that they would not be recommended to proceed at that point. So I guess I'm getting at, does the coordinating council, and specifically with Richard's comments, do you feel that that addresses specifically that concern? And if you would like to add components of how we address that criteria with giving our rank as the individual SAP members for, the 1 through 5 numerical ranking of that criteria, that may prove to be very helpful. And again, as our chair indicated, we do not need to specify this today, but moving forward, that could be something that is extremely valuable as part of the tools that the AP members have for this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. I'll just kind of pause for a minute to see if anybody wants to respond to what Kathy just offered, which I thought was excellent, and also appreciate Kathy mentioning, you can think on that a little bit, and that might be a good one for October. Okay, not seeing, John, I got your hand next, so I'm not seeing anything in response to Kathy's comment. John, go ahead. That's John Carmichael. John, I see you're unmuted, but we're not hearing you if you are speaking. Maybe you have a double mute on. I don't see your microphone at all anymore. Looks like you're unmuted again, John. We are not hearing you still, John, if you're speaking. Maybe let's see if we can get John figured out there. And I did have another hand go up, but now it's gone. So let's see. Looks like we're having some technical issues with John Carmichael. So John, we promise to come back to you if we get that sorted out. But until then, I don't have any other hands. And Julie, I think you've got a slide or two left. So do you want to flip to the next slide? And for the folks listening, we can come back to anything if you've had a thought. We can keep going here till about 10:30 or so. And we can come back to anything you want. So Julia, go ahead.
Hey Jay, this is John. Can you hear me now?
John, we got you. Excellent. Go ahead.
Good. Reset worked. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks. So Julia, appreciate the presentation. Great job on covering all of this stuff. And I appreciated Kathy's clarification on the importance of the purpose of the project and how the data are going to be used coming up as part of the initial proposal and the justification for it. And to me, that's always been a really important part of many of the citizen science projects done under fisheries agencies, certainly those within the council. And what I envisioned would be happening here with SCIFish, that they come from a place of there's an identified data gap, a cooperator, an agency, somebody's interested in going after that, sees getting fishermen involved as a way to do it. So it's very different than just collecting data for the sake of collecting data and hoping it'll be used some point down the road. And I think that's a really important distinction for, why SCIFish exists and why it's part of ACCSP. So, I think, as Kathy said, getting good information in the proposal about how the data will be used and making sure that those supporting the project understand that and do have an intention to use it would be really helpful. And then just in general, support, what you're proposing here for this SAP. It's good to have a kind of a gatekeeper group, I guess, to call it, to make sure that projects adhere to ACCSP principles and standards, even when there's not money necessarily being provided. So sorry for the little blip there, but thanks for getting in, Jay.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Good comments. Julia or anybody, any response to those comments?
No, other than I think the organizing committee kind of agrees with your kind of your comment and framing on things. We want to, one of the things we've talked a lot about with SCIFish is we really want to support projects that can help inform management and assessment. And to do that, you need to be going after specific data gaps or data needs that have been identified by whatever group, whether it's an assessment team, kind of a state management agency, a federal management agency, to fill those. And I know with at least the council's program, we put together what we call design teams. And I think we're kind of encouraging this for SCIFish. So you're getting people working together, fishermen, the project managers, the people who you want to use the data, talking at the beginning of a project to give it its best chance of success and making sure the data you're collecting are being collected in a way that they can meet that intended use. So I think that's something that all of the SCIFish team kind of feels strongly about. So yeah, I appreciate the comments and agree with kind of all that's been said on that point.
Awesome. I just had another thought, same topic that I'll just throw out there, and this is for the SCIFish team. So you've got this application review process, and the applying group might have somebody with expertise, whether they be on a assessment working group or had been in the past. And another source, and this is the part I wanted to offer, could be research recommendations from assessment reports. That's another good area to kind of, I guess, make your claim of the data gap defensible. So just another idea to throw out there on this topic. So with that, why don't you go ahead and flip to the next slide there, Julia.
All right, and so kind of the next specific thing we're interested in feedback on. Again, happy for any feedback y'all provided. What you've provided so far has been really helpful. But one thing we definitely wanted to get feedback from you guys on is, so, we mentioned this application process. We tried to develop kind of an objective review process for folks who apply for the use of kind of building a project in SCIFish. But this could put the SAP or the ACCSP in the position of potentially saying no or not yet to a partner for the use of the SCIFish tool. That's a little bit different than some of the other tools that ACCSP provides. And so we wanted to make sure that the coordinating council was comfortable with this, that you guys were comfortable with the overall SCIFish application process and kind of the pre and full applications with their review criteria. Have already heard some great feedback on making sure kind of that connection to the data end users, the assessment scientists or the managers, is kind of clear and used within the review process. But just wanted to see if you guys had any other feedback on that. In particular, if you're kind of comfortable with using this application process, knowing that may mean saying kind of no or not yet to a partner.
Great, thanks, Julia. First, I'm going to go over to Kathy. I saw your hand kind of pop up as we were heading this way, Kathy. So I don't know if this was on the last topic, but you're up first. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, it is exactly about this topic, and wanted to make sure with Julia's introduction to this slide, this is exactly why we have this slide in here, was where you all landed in the conversation and asking about the planning for the use of data in the management and stock assessment process. We want to make sure that the coordinating council is comfortable with the fact that we're putting a group of people through the SAP in a position of potentially telling some of our partners not yet, and sending an idea back to them. And Julia mentioned that we feel very strongly about this, and we've discussed this a lot, but that is one of the primary reasons why we've presented this slide to you all for your feedback now and for October, of course, is to see how you all feel with that comfort level. Have we done our job with this draft policy in presenting a objective review that allows us to comfortably and confidently say yes or no, please work on this and come back? And a lot of that is because of planning for the use of these data. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Let's see, David Gluckner. Go ahead, David.
Sure. So I think we've got plenty of experience telling people, no, you can't supply that data yet. Most of it's probably in the trip ticket or fishery effort information that we collect that ends up coming through a third-party vendor. So I think if the third-party vendor doesn't meet the requirements of the API, then no, we don't take the data. So I see this very similar to that, in that if you don't meet the standards that the SAP is trying to enforce, then no, go back and work on it. I think that's fine. Just it's kind of how I'm feeling about it anyway. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Anything you want to offer Julia or Kathy or Julie on that? Just sort of a comment, so just wanted to check. Okay, not seeing, there we go. John Carmichael, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Jay. And just I'll say, yeah, I support this. I think it's very important that have the ability to say no or not yet for a lot of the things we just discussed about the importance of ensuring ensuring data quality, ensuring you're getting data that are going to be used in the way that are intended, and then just avoiding the frustration of people who get involved in a project, submit data, and it doesn't get used, which we all know is a big issue with so many of the third-party things out there. So I think this is a really important and critical part of this.
Excellent, thanks, John. Okay, not seeing any, there we go. Carrie Kennedy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just have a quick question about how, what we envision the process to be like if we find that we say not yet to somebody or to a group of people that want to do particular kinds of projects. I don't have examples. But then we realize, okay, we need to update our standard so that it's clear we're not taking this. We need to update our policy so that it's clear we're not taking this. Is that something that SAP would just as a matter of business address, or is that something that would have to be considered and discussed through operations and the coordinating council?
Oh, go ahead, Julia.
No, go for it, Julie.
Oh, I was going to say, this is something that the group discussed, and I don't remember where we have it in the document, to be honest with you. But we do sort of have the idea that depending on what we might call the magnitude of the change, if we feel like there's just a small change in the review process where we feel like, hey, we want to edit the document a little bit and just stress that and again, I don't have a good example either, but you can't do this wacky thing that clearly two people have tried to do. So we need to make it clear that your wacky thing is not a thing. If it was a small change, we would probably, the staff would go ahead and take that on themselves. But any change that was larger, we would handle it just like any other technical committee. Minor changes are fine in the way that they do their daily business, because their job is to do that business, but any larger change would have to go through that ops coordinating consult process. And so it will essentially operate just like any other committee, is basically the way that we've talked about it.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands right now, so I think you've got at least one more slide, Julia, so feel free to flip ahead and get some more feedback.
And so that was really, thanks, Jay, that was really covered the questions kind of and feedback we were looking for specifically at this point, but we're happy to have kind of any other questions, or if y'all have any other kind of feedback or things you want to consider us to consider as we work to kind of finalize this document and share it with ops and bring it back to you in October. We're happy to kind of take any additional feedback or questions y'all have, but the feedback so far has been super helpful. So if there's anything else they all want to bring up, we are all ears.
Awesome, thanks. I thought there was one more in there, but this is perfect. So yeah, this is now opened up. In nothing, you don't have to just have a comment. If you have a remaining question, please feel free. Any comments you want to make now, please feel free. Okay, not seeing any hands. We've got 5 minutes to spare here, folks. So anything, there we go. Richard Cody, go ahead. Thank you.
It's more probably a point of clarification. So in providing feedback for SCIFish, do we want to provide anything prior to the October meeting, or do we want to save it for the October meeting? In other words, if we have comments we wanted to provide to Julia and others prior to that time?
That's a great question, Richard. And so looks like Kathy's got her hand up, and I think specifying both whether this is okay and who it should be referred to would probably be super helpful. So Kathy, go ahead.
I'm going to just put it out there. Julie and Julia, please chime in and see if you agree with me. We've been working together a long time, so I hope I can read their minds. I would say please absolutely send all comments and feedback immediately. And just as we would be operating with potential applications for this app to go through Julie, I would recommend that be the entity to which to submit comments. So Julie and Julia, are you okay with that?
Yeah, definitely, Kathy. I would say any comments or questions or feedback you want to pass on, kind of, yeah, send it as soon as you can. That way we can kind of incorporate it with kind of our kind of SCIFish organizing committee and address things so that when we come back to you, when it goes through the ops and advisors and it comes back to you in October, we've been able to address any kind of concerns or kind of comments or feedback you have. And yeah, I think we'll be sharing any feedback we get, we'll be sharing with the full organizing committee, but it could be sent to Julie or me or Kathy to kind of pass it on to the rest of the group.
Yeah, and this is Julie. I agree. I think the timing is the sooner the better. The more we can have this something that you look at in October and say, yeah, great job. You've addressed all our questions. And then you don't have to talk about it anymore. That is better. I'll defer to Jeff on how he wants to I'm more than willing to take comments and share them out, but I'll defer to Jeff on how he wants y'all to do that.
And if I could just follow up on that, Lauren Dollinger Few just reminded me that she's on the working group. So sorry I didn't pick up on that earlier, but so I'll probably work with Lauren as well to get my comments in. Yeah. And as far as I understand, you guys are meeting monthly, or not monthly, but weekly anyway. So there's some time.
Yeah, Richard, you're correct. We are meeting weekly, and Lauren is a very valuable member of the group. Her input has been really useful.
And this is Jeff. I absolutely support you guys sending comments directly to Julie and Julia. Focused on the actual document that was included in the PDF materials in terms of comments and areas to put in there, but any comments will be taken up by the group. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. And that makes a lot of sense, I think, and will lead to a really productive meeting in October. So that's great. Thanks for asking the question, Richard. All right. I do not have any more hands. So with that, I think we can go ahead and keep moving forward on our agenda. We pretty much nailed the time allotment, so nice job, everyone. And with that, let's go ahead and turn it back to Jeff for a discussion on recreational data priorities and activities. So Jeff, whenever you probably need some time maybe to transition back to take the screen, and take it away whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you, Jay. Let me change presenters here, and we will go right ahead. And I do want to just take a moment to agree with you guys on impressive presentation by the SCIFish group. Thank you all for doing that, and also keeping exactly on time. So good for everyone in doing that. So Julia mentioned the SCIFish Builder video link. That's also linked in the materials of the SCIFish summary on page 9, PDF page 19. So that link is already available to you. And again, just thanks to the SCIFish presenters and all involved in the vision of this. I'm excited to see these developments really come to fruition, the standardizing data fields for data collection, and it's directly tied to the use in assessments and management. And just before I move one more slide into the recreational data collections, I think it's important to restate that these SCIFish data are intended as supplemental to other data collections that will be then used in the assessment and fisheries management process to kind of support other data and/or decision processes. So with that, I will move forward to the recreational fisheries summary. And here, this is just kind of captures what was in the materials early on. I know there has been a lot of PR work on the fishing effort survey, a lot of work by MREP, and a lot of presentations at council and commission meetings. We did discuss whether this was a good forum for that today or not, and came up with a recognition that discussion would likely take longer than we thought we were going to have today. And therefore, in consultation with Bob and MREP and the ability for more public presentation and involvement, we did schedule in the preliminary agenda for the annual meeting a special session on Tuesday, October 17th, specific to the fishing effort survey, ability for a longer presentation, as well as a broader question and answer session. And so if we have time, there may be a question or two that comes up there, but I'm not sure there's a lot I could add here that hasn't already been presented by MREP, but we've got MREP folks on the call if we get to that point. So I just want to recognize the item and the planning for the October meeting and focus there, and then hopefully move on to our other items. And these are just what we had listed. So under the for-hire data collection methodology, this slide is essentially what we showed you back in May. It does, and then the documents that were provided, it has a longer version of the proposed design that was presented to MRIP. Since the May meeting, we did have an initial MRIP consultant review with the chairs and vice chairs of the Rec Tech Operations and Coordinating Council and the members that were involved in the pilot study from South Carolina, with South Carolina in 2016. So the focuses of those bullets there, the proposed design, are identified. We certainly recognize that this proposed design does not currently exist anywhere on the Atlantic coast in a program, but we needed to go through this initial consultant review process, and that was intended to get some feedback on the design. Were there areas that ACCSP, Rec Tech, whatever, needed to more fully identify the clarity points in the design? How were vessels going to be selected between frames? What kind of math would occur at different places? And how would the APIS as the dockside catch validation connect with the logbooks? And so those are some of the details that were discussed. I will say that we're getting close to having that meeting summary completed, and then waiting for the consultant's review from MREP to be added to that, and then we'll be able to share that out once it's ready to be distributed. So that is a very brief note on something that we were hoping we'd be a little bit further along on, but hopefully that'll be coming up and you'll have additional information. But there was great discussion at the meeting. The process is absolutely intended and expected to be iterative. And so where it says implementation timeline is to be determined, it's really, we understand within ACCSP staff and Rec Tech that there will be additional work that needs to be done. This is not going to be fast. On the other hand, being thorough and considerate of the implications and what could move forward is really the process. And so this is likely another one of those things where it's a not yet answer, and we need to work on a few more things before we bring it back to MREP. So with that, I will. That's really all I had in this particular moment on the for-hire data collection methodology. So given that these slides are a little bit quick, well, why don't I pause and ask if there are any questions or hands raised at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So any questions on this stuff for Jeff? Looking for hands. All right, Jeff, I'm not seeing any hands. Probably keep marching along here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. The next slide and section is really about the presentation of MRIP estimates. And I'm going to call on a friend, Richard Cody, to help present some of this, but the MRIP survey and data standards were established in 2020. There are, I think, 4 slides here that are part of a presentation that Richard gave to the state directors on July 31st and are re-summarized here. And then the last portion of this is kind of where ACCSP is going next. And so he'll hand that back to me. So I'll continue to present, Richard, but why don't you go ahead and take it from here, and I'll move the slides as you call it out.
Right. Thanks, Jeff. So Jeff referred to the MRIP survey and data standards, and a couple of points I wanted to make up front is that this has been a collaborative process. We received input from the regional implementation teams and also the Finns in the Gulf and the West Coast, as well as the ACCSP. So worth mentioning for coming up with survey. One of those is OMB guide that basically is the coming up with publication standard for their data in terms of what they could reliably present on through data, and also just with best practices for our survey data. So the basic set of standards, there are 7 in total. The first 5, and I won't go into them in detail, really reflect certification and transition procedures that we have in place. And we're updating our procedural and policy directives to reflect this integration with the data standards, data and survey standards, and those should be available fairly soon. The last 2 really refer to process improvement, and then what we publish online as estimates for what we publish in any format really as estimates for the survey. So the number 6 I'll just briefly mention, and it was good timing based on the SCIFish presentation. There are different avenues to such as recommendations from stock assessment folks and others in terms of data needs and data gaps, but also there's a formal process that involves regional implementation planning and teams. And ACCSP, or the Atlantic Coast, has a regional implementation team, and they've just updated their most recent set of priorities. So I think it's worth remembering that resource is there also for state partners wishing to develop SCIFish types of applications to address data gaps, that some of those are probably referred to in those regional implementation plans. So the bulk of what I wanted to talk about today, though, is related to access and information management. And it's the one standard that I think you hear probably the most amount of concern regarding. Jeff, if we could have that's it, the next step, yeah. So if you go to our web query tool right now, you'll notice that there have been some changes made to the way we present data. So added in April 2023, we add some fields that refer to whether or not the estimate meets our precision standard for publication. And in that, it'll either be a yes or no. And those estimates are flagged in red on the website. And the difference here is that there's more emphasis, a greater emphasis put on the reliability of the estimate. For instance, when you have PSEs that exceed 50%, which is the standard we're using for MRIT data, those are flagged, and there are a couple of questions are asked on the query tool. One is, does it meet the standard? And then the second is whether the estimate in question is significantly different from 0 or not. We also provide, just as additional sort of reinforcement at that point, the upper and lower confidence intervals, for 95% confidence intervals for the estimate. So obviously, if that contains a 0, it won't be significantly different from 0 when you look at them at that level. So those are flags that we're putting in the data, and the idea is that we present data identifying the limitations ahead of their use. And I think this has been sort of interpreted as good and bad in some cases. The good being that it points out the limitations of the data more clearly, the bad being that users don't have the same level of access that they've had in previous years, so it can be perceived as less transparent. So next slide. So just to emphasize the goal of the precision standard here in terms of how we present data, we are presenting data in a cumulative fashion. And the reason for that is quite simply to make better use of the sample that we have. So when you add sample or aggregate sample temporarily, you increase sample size, so the estimates increase in precision. And that really, in terms of the amount of data we have to flag on the website, reduces the number of flagged estimates that we would have to present. And it also makes the best use of the data, emphasizing sample size as an important component here. And in some cases where you have rare event species and what I would call infrequently encountered species, imprecise estimates are really very difficult to combat, even with increases in sample size. But that said, I mean, this doesn't take away from the fact that additional sample is the best way to address this. We're making the best use we can of the sample that we have currently available to us. So next slide. I think this is the last slide for me. So the key takeaways here are that the new way of presenting data online basically is cumulatively by wave. Imprecise estimates above 30% are flagged, and then the ones that don't meet the precision standard, that's greater than 50%, are identified. They're not masked as we had originally planned. Microdata and tools remain available to analysts, so we have provided tools that allow data users the ability to produce their own custom estimates and to meet their own unique needs. And the last bullet here I'll mention is important because regardless of our adoption of this new standard, the use of and the interpretation of user-produced custom estimates will continue to rely on their analytical justifications and assumptions, and those are outside of the survey design constraints that we have in place for estimation. So there may be additional data that analysts have at their disposal that we would not have in terms of producing the estimates for publication purposes. And then the next step I'll mention is a collaborative effort that's ongoing currently with the Southeast Science Center, basically to come up with a decision framework that allows us to look at alternative estimation approaches to address the use of, or I should say, imprecise data, so to better use imprecise data. So those might include things like multi-year averaging. There are different flavors of that we're looking at right now. There are also modeling approaches, imputation approaches, and as well as that, we have some small area estimation approaches. Those rely on auxiliary data sources to sort of inform weighting of samples. So there are different components that we're looking at, and we have had one workshop so far. So that workshop really resulted in us identifying some homework to do, so to speak, and then also for us to set up the second workshop. And the goal is to, once we get to a point where we have, a presentable, we'll say, set of methods that we can look at, and some options for a decision framework, we would bring in our partners. At this point, we don't want to go too far down the road, to make sure that we're not getting out of line with MSA requirements and other legislative constraints on the use of the data. So that's where we are. I hope to have the opportunity to kind of present on the progress of this working group as we move forward, and also to probably try to get some recruits from ACCSP and state partners in the process as we move along. So Jeff, that's where I'll leave it, and you can take over the rest of the presentation.
That's excellent. Thank you, Richard. Thanks for collaborating in and getting that extra support of the regional teams process and kind of the data standards presentation back out there. The next part of this is really where is ACCSP headed in the coming months about the public presentation of the MRIP estimates. And so it's listed in the materials as kind of 3 phases. I have to say, it's a little tough to follow the SCIFish presentation because my slides are a little text heavy and theirs were more exciting, but we do appreciate your attention here. The phase 1 public data warehouse, to be a good data collection partner with MRIP in the state conduct of APIS and FHTS, it's really on us to, in our own volition, to kind of be consistent with MRIP on presenting the public data warehouse and the non-confidential kind of approaches. On the confidence intervals, the cumulative estimates, adding in some of those additional fields we haven't traditionally shown, like whether it was a final or preliminary estimate, and extending out what the fishing year options are. So the ability on the MRIP website now has is something that ACCSP is looking at developing, where you could start the year at the beginning of any wave. So instead of following a calendar year, clearly running waves 1 through 6, there will be an option to select the fishing year, which is presented on the MRIP public page at the moment. So you could start wave 3 and then go through the following year, wave 2. And so still provides cumulative estimates, but you can adjust when those start depending on the species that you would be looking at within the bounds of the survey program. So phase 1 is really to adjust the public data warehouse. That is something that will be completed in 2023. Alex Johnson and staff have been working on the database changes in terms of the processing of the underlying information, as well as the parameters to guide the project. We actually have a contractor on board to help us with a little bit of the end user interface, making those dynamic pages work in the way that they're intended. And Alex has already asked for and received some state leads help in doing the QA/QC and kind of feature-rich approaches as to what will go into all that. And so we're excited to move forward in that direction. Moving on to phase 2, we've also, as a partner to all the signatories of ACCSP, recognize that there is concern about individuals assessment folks running a domain estimate in customized ways, and so we're looking to create a special named user access for the detailed wave data, kind of for the short term as we figure out ways to get out about this, and that is specifically focused on agency staff working on species with active management. And I say that with focus because there are certainly concerns in the South Atlantic, or really anywhere, where there are some species that even when lumped by the whole year or multiple states may or may not meet the data presentation standards for PSEs, then the ability to kind of still see that information is important. And I think presentation that Richard just gave and highlighting that the PSEs above 50 will remain to be seen, but flagged in a color that makes it obvious, is a standpoint that ACCSP has done for a long time, as well as MRIP, and we'll both continue to do that. And so I think that's a helpful approach. But there are some areas that we've heard of through the Assessment Science Committee, through the Rec Tech, where having access to the more detailed wave data may help ancillary things like setting seasons. And I say ancillary to the inputs to a stock assessment at an annual level. And so that phase 2 is something that we're working on, but that might need additional time to get completed for the user authorization process. And so, as I said, we've got a little bit more work to do to identify the process to give those named users access, and again, focus on agency staff and active management species. And then phase 3 is an item that we're catching up on from the past. So probably over a decade ago, Rec Tech had asked for ACCSP to present catch frequency analysis, number of fish caught by number of anglers per trip, as well as directed trip queries with 7 different definitions of what a directed trip was. We had taken that off of our website when the MRIP estimates were and calibrations were occurring, and just have not gotten back to rerunning those with the right math for all years on the current data sets. And so we will be redeveloping the catch frequency and directed trip queries as part of the ACCSP data warehouse, and that will likely extend into 2024. And so those are the ACCSP plans and approaches. The phase 2 is the one that is really looking for a consistent data presentation available to agency staff that will be doing stock assessments, and that will kind of provide a bridge to be able to use this information until adopting the more cumulative items or different approaches comes to fruition. So with that, again, I'm going to pause and ask for questions. And thanks for your attention here.
Thanks, Jeff. So please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions for Jeff or Richard on their presentation. All right, Jeff, not seeing any hands, so why don't you keep flipping along here.
All right, perfect, thank you. This is, again, a nod to the Atlantic Recreational Implementation Plan and the MRIP regional planning process. Richard mentioned it, and of course the Coordinating Council approved these 6 priorities last year. And given today's earlier presentation on citizen science, in this document we did specifically flag citizen science in a whole paragraph as a tool that could be used to address any one of these priorities. But as a tool, it wasn't its own priority for the data collection. So these were the data needs that were listed here. And how did these priorities get generated? Again, this is just kind of revisiting the MRIP hybrid approach to implementing collection of data needs, regional plan developments, and of course then the national plans. And NOAA Fisheries maintains a central role in data collection, estimation, and administration, and implementing of the surveys and implementing the surveying data standards, and producing, of course, the estimates. The regional and state partners, as we are, identify these data collection priorities, coordinate survey operations, and participate in the QA/QC with the ongoing data. So obviously the ACCSP recreational team, as well as all of your state folks that are out in the field doing the MREP APIS and making phone calls for the for-hire telephone survey are participating in that, as well as ongoing meetings to say, are there adjustments that are being requested of the survey to do that. And of course, there's 8 regional implementation teams that publish those implementation plans and also serve as kind of a coalition body to find and vet activities that are really important to the region instead of over a single partner. And so the focus here is certainly on partnership and moving forward as partners and members of the Atlantic Regional Team. I do kind of remind folks that if we work within this structure to address the data needs, the items that generate regional interest and benefits, we then will be able to bring up to MREP for greater consideration. And so there is a process, there is a way to vet this either through RecTech or Coordinating Council or operations, but the use of ACCSP to identify areas that either are within the priorities, or if the priorities shift, we can redo that plan in under the 5-year timeline. So we have a process that is here and a partnership to be able to raise these issues. And as things come up, it's certainly a good opportunity to use that process to identify those items and bring them up to MREP. So there have been a couple of opportunities where this regional plan have ways to refocus how the process occurs. I encourage you guys to use it. Overall, it works real well. And I do have a couple of items from the Regional Implementation Council I'll need to summarize and send out to you guys in a separate email, just for your feedback on what the progress is. And that'll be coming out hopefully tomorrow. They're looking for some feedback from you, as they have for other congressional reports on state partnerships and other type things. So with that kind of ends our presentation for the recreational items. And I guess I'll just pause and ask if there's discussion on any of the recreational data and priority items that have been presented today.
Thanks, Jeff. A great job getting through all of that to both you and Richard. Yeah, so let's, we've taken a couple of pauses as we've been going through, but before we move on to the next agenda item, I'll just see if there are any questions, comments for any of the topics that were covered under this agenda item. So please raise your hand if you do. All right, Jeff, I am not seeing any hands. So I think we can go ahead and park that agenda item and move on to the next, which is a discussion of the 2024 activities planning. And that is back to you, Jeff. So whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it. And the 2 portions of this agenda that I did want to go over with you all today may not take the full time here, but so we do have opportunity to talk if necessary. But really wanted to touch on the action planning process and draft to the full coordinating council, and also just a quick brief status on the FY 2024 proposals that are going to be discussed at the Ops and Advisors coming up in September. But first, the 2024 action planning, we just have the one slide here. I was not planning on pulling up the document that was sent out with all the kind of track changes, but every year we do kind of a staff chair and vice chair update of the annual action plan. And this year, as we go through that process, we have this meeting as an opportunity to kind of share that a little bit more broadly. And so we do have a track changes version that was sent out in the materials. Goal 3 is specific to the fisheries dependent data that is focused in collection of what ACCSP does. I wanted to offer, we can certainly have discussion today, but opportunity to comment. You can email me directly by mid-September here, and then we'll get that folded into the full action plan that gets evaluated by the Administrator of Oversight Committee and then considered for action during the ASMSC business meeting. And so for that, this was a good opportunity to solicit any comments or thoughts that you may have going into this process, because once we get to October, it's a little bit late to make changes. So. Does anyone want to make a comment at this time, or just opportunity to submit it? I see a hand, Dave Bleckner.
Hey, Jeff. As I read through, I think goal 3 here, it still only specifies timely, accurate catch effort in biological data. At what point are we going to incorporate economic data in that list?
It's a good question. The annual action plan is really focused on where we expect to accomplish items in the coming year. And so while some data collection includes economic questions, as a broad ACCSP focus for a lot of our staff, and including in SCIFish in the warehouse, we had not identified that as a major goal for 2024. If that's something that you see that should be raised in its priority for 24, let me know.
Yeah, I think we're working on transferring some of our logbook data to y'all, and that information also contains surveys on economic data. So at some point, I think, if not 24, maybe 25, we need to start specifying that. Thanks.
That's good, thank you. And
any other, thanks for that, David. Any other comments on the action planning for Jeff? Please raise your hand. I'm not seeing anything. Jeff, I think you got one slide left there, so I think you can go.
I do. Just jump right ahead to that. And you know, this point here is a summary of the FY24 proposals. So based on our meeting in May and the RFP that went out, I want to say we successfully solicited a lot of new proposals. We were worried about not enough proposals, and we ended up with too many, which is a fabulous response for asking folks to consider proposals for ACCSP funding. So there were a total of 18 proposals that were submitted. One was withdrawn. This was a summary that is a little bit updated from what I sent out in the materials. The one that was withdrawn was PRFC, and one proposal moved from new to maintenance, which is why the numbers, the grand totals here line up a little bit differently. And the one that changed was a Rhode Island Woke proposal that moved up to maintenance, and the withdrawn was PRFC blue catfish. So these things will be ranked by operations and advisors in September. Their meeting, I believe, is the 19th and 20th. I do encourage communication with your ops members, and I really wanted to make sure that this scale of what the range of proposals were, what the funding looks like at the moment, were presented to you, considering that both maintenance and new groups of proposals are higher than the 75%, 25% split identified in the funding decision document. The proposal selection may need some additional discussion time in October, and the groups are doing kind of the full ranking proposals for both maintenance and new, and that is really to preserve the coordinating council and leadership team's direction on the use of prior year unallocated funds. And so I'll have an update closer to October on those unallocated funds. There may be a little bit more that we'll be able to make available to the proposal process. But again, I'm still kind of working on those numbers at this time. The other thing I will highlight here is under the ACCSP admin grade proposal, it does say that it's basically, the base is essentially the same as the FY23 last year's proposal, and the guidance during last November's annual meeting with the coordinating council was to provide options that may or may not fit in with the administrative proposal that could be selected by the coordinating council at the time of funding. So there's kind of the base in there and two options for additional projects that are clarified in the document and will be reviewed and considered by the option advisors. So with that, are there questions on the funding and the proposal? I really just wanted to highlight, we did a great job of soliciting proposals. Thank you to all of you and your staff who were able to submit a proposal. And that good job led us to some good decisions ahead in finding the proposals that will best fit ACCSP's direction and need and funding requirements of the partners.
Great, thanks, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, I think this was kind of a heads up to give you a first look at this stuff. Happy to take any quick questions anyone might have, recognizing that we're going to talk in much more detail later on this subject. So go ahead and raise your hand if you have any quick questions on funding stuff or the proposals. Okay, Jeff, looks like we don't have any hands, so I think that gets us through the agenda with the exception of other business. So quick question out to the group. Is there any other business to come before the coordinating council? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, not seeing any hands. On the screen there, you see we have our next meeting. That's the Tuesday of meeting week. So we'll be coming back to some of this stuff. So this is a nice opportunity to get out ahead of some of this stuff, give you that kind of quick look at these things, give you a little bit of focus as you're preparing for the annual meeting. And I think we've set ourselves up really well here to have a good productive meeting in October. So with that, Jeff, maybe for the very last thing there, I'll pass that back to you.
Fantastic, thank you. I added an extra R in there. I apologize, Marty, but thank you. Today is Marty's last day with PRFC. I wanted to take a moment to recognize and appreciate your years of service with ACCSP and PRFC, and over that time, your work with us and adoption of ACCSP and SCIFish tools to move PRFC forward, getting as part of the proposal process. And yeah, it was just kind of the part of that history of partners getting projects to forward their data collection and data management. And in the last few years, PRFC has been ready to do that and making great strides. So appreciate that project, but also what you have done to jump in, participate in coordinating council, and really provide a lot of help to ACCSP. So thank you, and we will probably see you under another agency soon, is what I'm hoping. But thank you, Marty.
Just to extend my appreciation as well to you, Marty, and wish you the best of luck in your new gig. So with that, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. I want to thank everybody who presented today. Really nice job to all the presenters. Covered a lot of material. I think you covered it really well. And so thanks to everybody for that. Good discussion as well. So thanks to the coordinating council. And I will wish you all a nice start to your fall, and we will see you all in October. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everyone. We'll get the presentations out to you soon, and meeting materials as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.